Hello my friends! So, the Chinese DLC for AoM Mythology Retold just dropped, and you might be interested in what those new Chinese units can do and how strong they are. So I'm gonna make a tier list to help you with that, and I'm gonna rank all the units in the new DLC. I'm gonna divide the video into 5 segments: Builders and Resources, Human and Siege Units, Heroes, Naval Units, and Myth Units. Oh, and by the way, I apologize to everyone in advance for massacring the Chinese unit names, but I promise I will do my best. So, let's get started. First up, we have the Peasant. This guy is actually quite interesting. Since he's made in China, he's like 20% worse at gathering stuff than other workers. But also, since he's made in China, he costs less. 20% less, to be exact. So he kind of balances himself out. Personally, I like my builders efficient, but hell, I like them cheap as well. So the Peasant from Temu is getting a middling B. Next up, we have Clay Peasants. They are spawned from the Creation God power and are exactly the same as normal peasants, except that they last 2 minutes. Which means they last exactly 1 minute longer than me.
Ooh, self-burn! Those are rare.
And the fun thing here is that the number of peasants depends on which age you cast the God power at. Unfortunately, you don't really get that many of them in the beginning. It's only like 2 in the Archaic Age and 4 in the Classical Age, but you do get 10 in the Heroic Age and 25 in the Mythic Age, which is pretty awesome. And since they have the same stats as peasants, I'm gonna put them in the same tier as peasants, so B tier. Next up is the new worker unit from the Chinese faction, a giant called a Kuafu. Now this guy is really cool. So what makes him special is that he gathers wood and gold 4 times faster than a regular peasant. He gathers food 2 times faster and builds 3 times faster. But yeah, wood and gold, that's where you're gonna put him to work. And this guy also has custom resource models depending on what he is carrying. So for instance, he can carry a giant clunk of gold. Unfortunately, as cool and amazing as this unit is, there is one downside, and it's his cost. With the solid resources that you have to pay for him, you also have to pay a whopping 17 favor, which is just insane. That's so flippin' much. Like, he is worth it, don't get me wrong, but 17 favor is a lot for a worker unit. So just bite the bullet and spend that favor. You'll see it's gonna be worth it in the end, because this guy is pretty awesome. If he would cost 12 favor instead of 17, I would give him an S tier. This way, I'm gonna have to give him an A tier. Next up is the Kuafu Chieftain. If you're worshipping the goddess Nuwa, you can buy an upgrade which will grant you a chieftain, and the chieftain respawns every 2 minutes after he is killed. I don't know how much you're gonna be fighting with him, but he, just like the regular Kuafu, is a pretty chunky boy. That being said, you're probably gonna use him for resources. He's a bit more efficient than the normal Kuafu, but not by that much. So I'm gonna put him in the same tier, A tier. Next, we have the Mechanical Ox. Aw, the guy looks like a toy. Really cute. But he is the same as the other caravan types, so I'm gonna put him in the special tier, which is the same as other factions. Next up, we have the Pixiu. Now, the Pixiu is also a caravan type. However, the fun thing about it is it carries a bit more. Plus, if you buy a special upgrade, 20% of its gold is given to you as food and wood as well, which is pretty cool. Unfortunately, this guy is a myth unit, which means it costs favor. And look, as cool as the guy is, it costs 150 food, 50 wood, and 5 favor. Which is a bit steep, to be honest. So, you know, I like him, but I don't like him that much, so I'm gonna put him in B tier. Next up, the Dao Swordsman. Now, for an infantry unit, this guy is a really chunky boy. He doesn't do too much damage, but he can take a lot of damage. And to top it all off, he's also pretty cheap. In fact, he's so cheap that you can just make a bunch of these and you'll live a happy life. So after a cost-benefit analysis, I'm gonna give it a B tier. Next up, G Halberdier. And Mr. G here is good against cavalry. And that's it. Now, he is also cheap, but unfortunately the Dao Swordsman is better than him in any way except fighting cavalry. This is your counter cavalry unit, but for any other infantry melee assignment, the Dao Swordsman is better. So I'm gonna put him in C tier. Next up, the Wuzu Javelinier. This guy is a ranged counter archer which costs 75 wood and get this, 10 gold. So he's also very dirt cheap. If gold is the delimiting factor and there are no mines nearby, you should go for these guys. 10 gold. That's like insane. Now, since they are only good against archers, I'm gonna put them in B tier, but I really love the price. Next up, the Fire Archer. Now, this is your classic anti-infantry unit. Its description also says it's pretty good against buildings. However, I really didn't feel that. These guys can do some damage, but you need something dedicated to go against buildings, so yeah, just buy them for anti-infantry stuff. And yeah, they are pretty cheap, but again, cost-benefit analysis says they are a middling B tier. Next up, the Crossbowman, Chukonu. Now, the great thing about the Crossbowman is that it launches a volley of arrows, and these do really good damage to enemies. It is not the cheapest unit, but it's really good. It does take a little bit of time to set up, but that time is pretty negligible. Honestly, I really like the Crossbowman, so I'm gonna give it an A tier. And while we're at the theme of crossbows, next up we have the Siege Crossbow. Now finally we have a long-ranged anti-infantry thing. I really like building those. Now, unlike the Ballista, which just sprays and prays, this guy shoots one arrow, and he does it very quickly and very precisely, which makes this guy perfect for defending. It costs 150, which I believe is the same cost as the Ballista, but I honestly feel a lot better playing with this guy than the Ballista, so I'm gonna give him an A tier. Next up is the Axe Cart, one of the weirdest Chinese units there are. This is a close-range siege unit, an expensive 200 costing siege unit, and honestly it feels a bit underwhelming. Personally, I'm not a fan of close-range siege stuff, especially if you have a fine working Ballista, and this is also a mythical age unit, so, you know, you're gonna have to wait a bit until you can actually play with it. So this might just be me, but I think a long-range siege unit can do everything a close-range siege unit can, with the probability of it surviving being quite a lot higher. So I'm gonna put this guy in C tier. Next up is the White Horse Cavalry. Now, Mr. White Horse is a heroic age counter archer unit. There is nothing too special about him except the fact that it can launch an arrow before it goes into battle. That's cool, but other than that, it's nothing too special. So I'm gonna give him a nothing too special B tier. Next up, we have something a lot cooler. Say hello to the Tiger Cavalry. This is a not too expensive Mythic Age unit, which has a really cool ability. Now, if you've played the Arena of the Gods, you might remember that mutation that allows cavalry units to dismount after they are killed. Well, this guy does it without having the mutation. If this guy is killed, it dismounts and continues fighting as a foot soldier, which is really cool. But other than that, he has pretty solid stats for someone who costs 115 food and 50 gold. So yeah, I think this really cool unit deserves a really cool A tier. Next up, the Terracotta Rider. Now, Chinese town centers have a unique ability. Only once per town center you can spawn 6 Terracotta Riders. Now, these guys are a decent help me out of an emergency kind of button. Unfortunately, they lose health throughout their existence, however they lose it a lot slower on blessed land. So yeah, they are basically meant to defend and nothing else. If they were a free unit, I would have given them an A tier, but they do cost like 150 to activate, so I'm gonna give them a B tier. Oh, and by the way, these guys have a green edge just like myth units do, however these guys are not myth units, these guys are cavalry. And now we move on to the hero section of the video, starting off with one of the most creative Chinese units, the Pioneer. Now, the Pioneer has a special ability which allows them to release a lantern. And the lantern is pretty user-friendly, like you can just select a direction and it's gonna float there, and it will reveal the map. Oh, and there's a really fun upgrade that allows the lantern to burn in an area after it's destroyed, which is pretty cool. Unfortunately, his combat abilities are not that special, but it's a really creative unit, so I'm gonna give it an A tier. Next up is the Sage. Now, this guy might look like an old man, and that's because he is, and he has the health of an old man. But if you do keep him safe, he's a really strong guy. Like, first of all, he's a healer with the heal rate that is not too impressive, but he can also heal units around the main target, which is cool. But his most important ability is that it can create a copy of an enemy myth unit. And any enemy myth unit counts. So, the stronger myth units are, the better this guy is. And he also stuns the unit for a few seconds after it's being mimicked. cause why not? I was thinking about giving this guy an A, but in the right hands, if this guy is controlled properly, I think it has the potential to be an S tier. Okay, now we're starting off with the Chinese names. Next up is Jiangxia. Now this guy is decent at combat, but he has two cool abilities, or rather two cool interchangeable auras. In one state, enemy myth units deal less damage, and in the other, your myth units deal more damage. So yeah, this is also a unit which can do a lot if it's microed properly, so I'm gonna give it an A tier. Next up is Yang Yan. Now this guy is a tier 4 hero which shoots a dragon head that returns to him and heals him. And the heal can be quite significant actually. And other than that, he's just a real incredible powerhouse of a unit. Seriously, this guy alone can do so flippin' much. He is a bit on the expensive side, but man can he dish out damage. Oh, and by the way, he does area damage with each attack, cause why not? So yeah, this guy is quite incredible, so he's gonna get an incredible S tier. Next up, we have Li Ying. Now this guy can throw 5 swords with each attack, and he's pretty good against clump stuff at ranged or myth units close up. And he has a really cool ability called the Golden Pagoda, and that pagoda stuns everyone inside it for 5 seconds, which is pretty cool. Unfortunately, I don't think this guy is as powerful as the previous hero, but he is still pretty strong, so I'm gonna give him an A tier. Next up, we have Wen Zhong. And like a sage, Mr. Wen here can make a temporary copy of an enemy myth unit. However, that copy is gonna be longer and the enemy is gonna be stunned longer. I think maybe even for the entire duration of the unit. In the last campaign mission, he stun-locked my epic tier 4 god power dragon like he is nothing, and made a copy of him and rendered him completely useless for me for like 30 seconds. So yeah, that reason alone is gonna be enough for me to put this guy in S tier. Next up is Nezha, a really creative Chinese hero. Unfortunately, you can only have him if you play as Fuji. And when I said unfortunately, I really mean unfortunately. This guy is freaking amazing. So he has different models based on age. In the classical age, he's like a little kid, and in the mythic age, he's like a real full-fledged adult. And a real full-fledged adult man is insane. So get this. First of all, he's amphibious. Like he can move on water, man. Also, he is incredibly quick and launches devastating rings at enemies at choice. And the best thing, he leaves a trail of fire behind him. And that trail of fire is insane. Especially if you're playing the campaign. Like, you can totally bamboozle the enemy AI if you're playing with him. This guy is not only the most fun Chinese hero, this guy is one of the most fun heroes in the game. Period. And honestly, someone like that doesn't get anything less than an S. Badoomts. Okay, time for the naval units. First up, we have the standard fishing ship. And by standard, I really mean standard. 50 wood, and it's just the same as all other fishing ships in this game, so I'll place it in the appropriate tier. Next up, we have the transport ship, which is literally the same story. And it is literally the same tier. Okay, now we have something a bit more exciting. The arrow ship, or how the Chinese call it, the Doujian. Now, the Doujian is the standard arrow ship with one cool ability. If you buy an upgrade, it has a 20% chance to spawn a Maelstrom, which is a really cool vortex. But yeah, other than that, it's really nothing special. So I'm gonna give it an average B tier. Next up, the hammer ship, aka the Mengchong. Now, the Mengchong is nothing that special except one thing. It costs 1 less population than all other hammer ships. The same goes for the arrow ship, by the way. Now, honestly, I really don't make too many of those. I prefer other ship types to this one, and it's really nothing personal. I do need to have someone in C tier as well, so I'll put you in C tier. Hashtag sorry not sorry. Next up, we have the siege ship, or as the Chinese call it, the Luchuan. And the Luchuan also costs 1 less supply than the average siege boat. But just like the arrow ship, it's really nothing that special, so I'm gonna give it a B tier. Next up, the tier 3 naval myth unit, the Chiwen. Now this guy is really cool because he generates armor stacks. He has like 1/3 health stacks and 2/3 of his health is armor stacks. And those armor stacks seem a lot more durable than health stacks. This guy in general seems pretty durable. And the fun thing about him is you can like poke the enemy, lose some health and get back and regenerate those armor stacks. those regenerate automatically, which is really awesome. So yeah, this guy is pretty useful, and he's gonna get the pretty useful A tier. Next up, the tier 4 myth unit, aka the Scorpion Turtle, aka the Xuan Wu. Now imagine a Scorpion Man, but with the Scorpion Man being a huge chunky boy and him being amphibious as well. And you get this guy. This guy is a pure tank, which is insanely difficult to kill, and his stinger attack, well, it stings quite a lot. And it's really cool that you can have these guys in the water, and they can be used like tanks in the regular composition as well. So again, I'm gonna give him a pretty useful A tier. Next up, we have the Fire Horsey, aka the Xilin. First, he can use a Flame Breath ability, which damages units in a cone. And more importantly, he has a passive healing aura around him. Unfortunately, this guy is really bad in combat, so you do have to keep him in the back line. But yeah, if you take care of your horsey, he's gonna take care of you and your units as well. So I'm gonna take care of him and give him an A tier. Next up, we have the Yazi. Now, he is one of the coolest Chinese units out there. So this guy is something like a Chinese Anubite. He can be used to quickly strike the backline and inflict some damage, or quickly strike enemy villagers and, again, inflict some damage. This guy is really fast, he's not that expensive, and most importantly, he has a really cool and satisfying flash strike ability, which instantly teleports him to the targeted location and inflicts damage to enemies. And again, I can't stress this enough, I, for whatever reason, find this flash strike so freaking satisfying to use. As a unit, he however is pretty weak, but he's also pretty fast, so he can outrun most enemies. So yeah, that's kind of the trade-off you get with him, so I'm gonna give him a trade-off B tier. Next up is the Flying Tiger, aka the Zhongxie. And those wings of his are not just for show. This guy can take off and land wherever he wants. And when I say wherever he wants, I really mean it. And that includes the enemy backline and base. Like, this guy can do so much damage to the enemy base, and they're really tough to kill in early ages, because whenever they take a lot of damage, you can just fly away with them and they can be healed in the base. Now, I can definitely see this guy being very useful in multiplayer, but if you're playing campaign, it's gonna be less useful. However, he has really good stats for a classical age unit, so I'm gonna give him an A tier. Next up, we have the Fae. Now, this guy spawns in a group when you use the Spawn Fae Beast God power, and they will gradually lose health until they die. However, throughout their whole life, they can do a whole lot of damage, as you can see on the footage here. I will admit, they are less efficient in multiplayer, but in the campaign, they can really abuse the enemy AI to follow them and really take them down. For their campaign efficiency, I would give them an S. For their multiplayer efficiency, I would give them a B. So when we even this out, I'm gonna give them an A. Next up, we have the Tao Wu. Now imagine the Atlantean behemoth with a charge attack. And that's what this guy is. A huge tank who is good against buildings and who can disrupt a bunch of enemies with his charge attack. Now, I did say this when I initially saw this unit. It would be so cool if the charge attack had like a special ability or animation or do a whole lot of damage when it hits a building or a wall or something like that. It's a bit like underwhelming, underperforming, if you know what I mean. But yeah, you cannot deny the guy's efficiency. So yeah, because I'm missing that special oomph with him, I think he's just average. So he's gonna get the average B tier. Next up, this alien looking guy called the Taotie. Now this guy has the ability to insta-kill human soldiers. And not only insta-kill them, but insta-eat them. He can eat soldiers every once in a while, and when he does that, he gains attack damage. Unfortunately, this doesn't heal him, and he doesn't get maximum health, but he becomes a bigger and meaner beast. Based on the number of units he has eaten, he can make a freaking fireball. Because why not? And that fireball can do disgusting damage to enemies, especially if this guy has eaten properly in his life. The more units he ate, the more damage this is gonna give. So this is another one of those units that in the good microing hands, which are not mine, can do a lot of damage. So I'm gonna give it an A tier. Next up is the Baihu. Now this guy is used to focus on an individual unit and do a lot of damage to it. And in addition to that, while it is dealing a lot of damage to it, it also stuns them, cause why not? And while it's leaping towards the target, it knocks people away. And I know it really sounds cool, however, I personally feel it's a bit underwhelming. I know this guy has its uses, I know he can be really good, however, I feel that other tier 3 units are stronger than him. And I would feel better off building other tier 3 myth units than this one. I don't know, I just don't feel it, okay? And if I'm not feeling it, it's a C tier. It's just like that. However, next up is a unit that I am definitely feeling. The Qinglong, a giant dragon that spawns a vortex that does area damage. And when I say dragon, I mean real dragon, the flying one. And not that stupid Norse dragon who can't even fly and who even gives enemies gold when you kill him. Not that one. But yeah, this guy can fly, has a huge range, a really cool area of effect ability. He's literally super powerful, hard to reach, and does insane damage. This guy is one of the most powerful Chinese units, period. So yeah, again, no question about it, S tier. Next up is the Chuche. You might confuse this guy with a phoenix, but trust me, he does not come to life when you kill it. Been there, done that. So when entering combat, this guy increases the armor of nearby units, which is so cool. Like a couple of these guys can really make a difference. And he also attacks with area fire damage, cause why not? And those area fire damage attacks are really strong. So yeah, another flying area damage dealing tier 4 myth unit. Interesting. And by the way, you can also buy an upgrade for him so he can land and regenerate health. So yeah, he does share something with a phoenix, he can gain some health, okay? He can't gain a life back, but he can get something, okay? So yeah, for everything I've just said, another S tier through and through. Next up is the Hundun. Now, this big boy may seem a bit intimidating, but that's because he really is. He does not only frighten you, he can also frighten enemies to start fleeing from him. So having a couple of these guys on a group of enemies can completely change the tide of battle. Oh, and if that is not enough, it can also cast people in a cone into the void for a few seconds, making them unreachable and take very big damage. Now this guy is really slow, that's how they balanced him out. He does have a lot of health, but yeah, he's not as exciting to play as any other S tier units, so I'm gonna give him an A tier, but this is the closest an A tier unit has come to S ever. Next up is the Chinese Titan, and he is the same as all other Titans, except the fact that it has a neat axe and shield. But yeah, other than that, it's the same as all other Titans, so it's gonna get to the appropriate tier. And last but definitely not least, Yinglong, the father of dragons. He can be summoned with a tier 4 god power. Now this sounds an awful lot like another tier 4 god power that can also create a dragon. But rest easy, this one doesn't suck. It has two abilities. It can deal damage in an area and it can create a huge slow field around him. And since it rains around him all the time, it also gives a 10% increase in farming speed. Which is cool, I guess, but the other things about him are way cooler. So yeah, Age of Mythology finally gave us an unsucky dragon. And how do we not reward that with an S tier? And yeah, I guess that's it. All Chinese units ranked. Personally, I think as a faction they are pretty well balanced. There are a few things that I think are a lot stronger than they're supposed to be and that I think are gonna get patched out at some point. But yeah, as a whole, I think they've done a pretty good job with a faction that is completely new. Like, we already had the Greeks, we already had the Egyptians, we already had the Norse and the Atlanteans. We had some kind of Chinese, but those Chinese, you know, they're not that worth even mentioning, to be honest, because, well, if you've played the Chinese expansion in the original game, well, I'm sorry. However, if you've not, then you haven't experienced fully how good of a job these guys have done compared to the source material. You know what I mean? So yeah, that's it. I think there might be room for improvement, a couple of things, but as a whole, I think the list is okay. Please don't hate me if I've done something wrong. I might have, you know, knowing me, previous track records. However, I think this is okay. Anyways, thank you for watching. Thank you for being here. Thank you for sticking with me until the end. Like, share, subscribe, of course. This is YouTube and stuff. And I guess I'll see you in the next challenge. Peace.